Welcome to the Science of Hockey, the podcast where we break down the science behind ice hockey. I'm the analyst, your host, and every week we explore the data, research, and evidence that shape how we play, train, and understand the game of hockey. From biomechanics to performance psychology, we take you beyond the rink and into the research lab, giving you insights that go beyond hearsay and into what really makes the difference on the ice. Whether you're a player, a coach, a parent, or just someone passionate about the sport, we're here to bring you scientifically backed information in a language that's friendly and easy to understand. So grab your skates and let's dive into the science of hockey. Hello, hockey fans. This is the Science of Hockey, and I'm the analyst. Today, we explore the physical toll of professional ice hockey. Learn how game collisions, overuse, and intense schedules contribute to injury risks and what it means for player health. Stay tuned.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're strapping on some skates and hitting the ice.
Oh, yeah.
To explore the world of pro hockey injuries.
Definitely.
But not just the highlight reel hits that you see, during a game.
Right.
We're going deeper.
Absolutely.
We're going beyond those and looking at what really sidelines these guys.
You see a player limp off the ice and everyone assumes, oh, is that big hit,
Yeah.
But there's a whole other story with hockey injuries.
Okay. I'm intrigued already.
It's the kind of thing that develops over time slowly, almost silently.
Interesting. Okay, so to guide us through this deep dive, what kind of sources are we looking at today?
Well, our main source is going to be a 2020 research study, and it's from the Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine.
Okay.
And they followed players for a full year in the Swiss National League.
Okay.
So think of that as like their version of the NHL.
Gotcha.
And they tracked every single injury that forced a player to miss a game or practice time.
Okay, so we're not talking just, minor bumps and bruises here.
No.
These are serious injuries.
These are the ones that keep them off the ice.
Exactly.
What they call time loss injuries.
Okay.
And get this, in games alone, Swiss League players suffered almost 90
Wow.
time loss injuries for every 1,000 hours played.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. It's like an entire team
Yeah.
worth of injuries throughout a season.
That's wild. And you said this is even more frequent than in the NHL.
Yeah, more than 1.5 times higher. Now, this is just one league, of course, and there's a lot of factors that could be at play, but it definitely makes you think twice about that idea that European hockey is, less physical or less injury prone.
Right. Yeah, it kind of shatters that thought.
Yeah.
So, what parts of the body are really taking the brunt of it all?
Well, that's what's interesting. You might think, knees or shoulders, but it's actually the hip, groin, and thigh area.
Really?
Almost a quarter of all the injuries affect that region.
I would have thought, those big hits along the boards
Sure.
would lead to more shoulder and knee problems.
Well, of course those happen too, but think about the demands of skating in hockey.
Yeah.
It's those explosive starts, the powerful strides, and the constant shifting of weight and direction.
Yeah.
It just puts so much stress on the hip and groin.
Right. So it's not just the impact.
Yeah.
It's that constant strain
Exactly.
on the muscles.
And remember those muscle strains we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
A lot of those are happening in that hip and groin area too.
Makes sense. So it's like a double whammy, right?
Yeah.
You got the traumatic in-the-moment injuries and then that underlying strain that's building up over time.
Precisely.
Okay, so before we go too deep into that overuse side of things,
Yeah.
let's break down those traumatic injuries a little bit more.
Okay.
Aside from those muscle strains, what other diagnoses were they seeing?
Well, concussions came in second at about 18% of those time loss injuries. And it really highlights the risk of serious head injury in a sport like this, where you've got, players flying around on ice at high speeds with a hard puck and sticks in the mix.
Yeah, definitely not a sport for the faint of heart.
No.
So what's causing these injuries most often then?
Well, direct collisions with another player's body caused about 31% of the injuries, but puck impacts and, running into the boards were up there too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm guessing most of these are happening during games rather than practice.
You'd be right. Games accounted for about 75% of all the injuries.
Okay.
But this is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
The study found that injuries actually peaked in the second period of games.
The second period.
Yeah.
Why is that? Is it like, too early to be tired, but they're also not warmed up enough?
Well, the study authors couldn't say for sure, but one theory is that fatigue starts to set in during that second period, leading to slower reaction times, less focus, maybe even a bit more recklessness out there.
Interesting. So Is it totally random, or does it matter what position you play? Are certain players more likely to get injured?
Well, the study found that right forwards were the most frequently injured, while goalies, thankfully, had the lowest risk.
Yeah, makes sense. Right forwards are often leading the charge up the ice,
Right.
handling the puck more and kicking those checks along the boards.
Exactly. And if you think about the biomechanics of it all, the right-handed forward's dominant leg is generating the most power
Right.
for those quick turns and shots, potentially putting more stress on the hip and groin.
Yeah, it all ties back to those injuries we were talking about.
It does.
Okay, so we've talked about those in-the-moment dramatic injuries, but you mentioned there's a whole other category that often flies under the radar,
Yeah.
the ones that build up over time.
Right, those overuse injuries. And what this study found about overuse in hockey is honestly pretty surprising.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with it.
49% of the players experienced some level of overuse injury during the year.
Hold on, almost half.
Almost half the players.
That's a lot more common than I would thought.
It's a huge number, and it's a big reason why we're doing this deep dive today. Now, to be clear, not all overuse injuries were, debilitating.
Right.
Only about 13% were serious enough to limit them in training or game performance. But it still means a significant chunk of these players are dealing with persistent pain or restrictions.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So where are these overuse problems showing up?
Well, remember how we talked about the hip-groin area being the most common spot for those traumatic injuries? Guess what?
Don't tell me.
It's number one for overuse problems, too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, on average, about 16% of the players were battling hip-groin issues from overuse, and that's even higher than shoulders, backs, or knees.
Wow, so those powerful skating motions are really taking a toll in the long run.
They are.
It makes me think about dancers and the hip problems they have.
Yeah.
Is it a similar situation?
You're making a great comparison. The repetitive movements and the stresses on the joints are very similar. And what's concerning is that we're starting to see signs of hip problems, even in young hockey players who are still developing.
Yeah, that is concerning. It highlights the need to understand these injuries better and, find ways to prevent them. Before we go any further, though, I think it's important to acknowledge that this study, like any research, has its limitations.
Of course.
We don't want to jump to conclusions based on, just one set of data.
Absolutely. You got to look at research critically. And the study was limited to 5 Swiss teams, so we can't automatically assume these findings would apply to other leagues, especially those with different playing styles or rules.
Right.
And also, they relied on players to self-report their overuse injuries. So there's always a chance some might have been missed or underreported.
That's a good point. So with those limitations in mind, what are the big questions that we still need to answer? What are the things we don't know yet about hockey injuries?
Well, one big question is how these injury rates might differ in other leagues. And we also need to understand the role of those training regimens in these overuse injuries. Could certain types of off-ice training actually be contributing to the problem?
Interesting.
And then there's the question of, could we change some of those skating techniques to reduce the strain on those players' hips and groins?
So much to think about. This is already making me see hockey in a whole new light, and I'm sure you're feeling it too.
I am definitely. We've got a lot more to uncover in this deep dive, so stay tuned.
Absolutely. So we've uncovered some pretty surprising stats about hockey injuries, especially those sneaky overuse ones. But data is just data, right? What really matters is what we do with it.
Absolutely. Knowing that nearly half of all players are dealing with some level of overuse injury, that's a wake-up call. It makes you wonder, what can we do to prevent these injuries from happening in the first place?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's not just about protecting players' careers, it's about their long-term health, too.
Exactly. Imagine the impact if we could even just slightly reduce those injury rates. Longer careers for the players, more consistent team performance, and maybe even a shift in the culture of the sport.
I'm already brainstorming here. Like, maybe teams could incorporate more injury prevention strategies into their training. Like targeted exercises to strengthen those high-risk areas we were talking about.
I love that. And what if we took that even further and looked at equipment modifications?
Okay, yeah.
Could we design skates or padding that distribute forces more effectively and reduce the strain on those vulnerable joints?
Like maybe skates that provide more ankle support or padding that absorbs more impact during collisions.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about rule changes.
Right.
Certain types of hits like those blindside checks near the boards, those are really dangerous. Maybe there are ways to adjust the rules and make the game a bit safer without sacrificing the intensity and excitement.
Those are great ideas. But I imagine it would take a lot of collaboration to make that happen.
Oh, for sure. We do. Researchers, medical professionals, coaches, equipment manufacturers, and even the players themselves all on board.
Yeah.
But, that's what makes it so exciting. It's a challenge that requires creativity, innovation, and a genuine commitment to player safety.
All this talk about injury prevention reminds me of something the study mentioned about how injuries are tracked and classified.
Okay.
Apparently, there's some inconsistencies in the data because different teams and leagues have different definitions of what's considered an injury.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. The way those injuries are reported can really impact the results of these studies, you know? If we're using different criteria, it's like comparing apples and oranges. We need a standardized system for tracking and reporting injuries across the board.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if the problem's even bigger than what these studies are showing.
Right.
Like, what if those minor injuries are being overlooked because there isn't a consistent way to track them?
It's a valid concern. A standardized system wouldn't just make the research more reliable, it would help us identify trends and risk factors more effectively. We might even get insights into how age, skill level, playing style, and even coaching practices influence those injury rates.
Like, imagine having a database that tracks injuries across all levels of hockey, from youth leagues all the way up to the pros. We could learn so much.
That's a fantastic vision, and having that kind of data would be invaluable for developing those evidence-based prevention programs, coaching strategies, and even equipment designs. It could revolutionize the way we approach player safety in hockey.
And speaking of prevention, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Based on everything we've learned today, what do you see as the most promising avenues for preventing injuries, both those traumatic ones and the overuse injuries?
Well, we've talked about a few, targeted training programs, equipment modifications, rule changes. But I think there's another one that's often overlooked: education. We need to educate players and coaches about the risks, the mechanics of their bodies, and the importance of proper conditioning and technique.
It's like giving them the tools to be proactive about their own health.
Exactly. Players need to understand that it's not weak or uncool to prioritize their health. And coaches need to create a training environment that emphasizes safety and encourages players to speak up about any pain they're feeling.
I imagine that kind of cultural shift could really trickle down even to the youth level.
Absolutely. If we instill these values early on, we can create a generation of hockey players who are more aware of those risks, more proactive about prevention, and more likely to have long, healthy careers.
It's a win-win for everyone. This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to the complexities of hockey injuries. It's not just about toughing it out or playing through the pain. There's so much more to it.
And it's so important that we don't just accept these injuries as inevitable. We have a much deeper understanding now of the risks, the causes, and the potential solutions. It's up to all of us, players, coaches, medical professionals, researchers, even fans, to advocate for a safer and healthier future for hockey.
You're saying we all have a role to play?
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most empowering takeaways from all this. We're not just passive observers. We can all make a difference in making hockey a sport that's as safe as it is exciting.
Well said. And for you listening who've joined us on this deep dive into the world of hockey injuries, we want to leave you with a final thought, something to ponder as we wrap up. We've been talking a lot about the physical side of these injuries, but what about the mental side of things? Could a player's mental state actually increase their risk of getting hurt?
That's a great question, and it's something that researchers are really starting to look into more.
Yeah.
We often think of these athletes as, superhuman.
Yeah.
That they're immune to stress and pressure, but they're just as human as the rest of us.
They have good days and bad days.
Exactly, and what's interesting is that those mental and emotional states can actually manifest physically.
Okay.
If you're feeling stressed or anxious, your muscles tense up, your reaction time might be slower, you might be more prone to making mistakes.
Right, so you're saying that pressure to perform, fear of letting down their team, or just general life stress could actually increase a player's risk of getting injured.
It's definitely a possibility, and it opens up a whole new way to think about injury prevention.
Yeah.
What if we started incorporating mental wellness strategies into hockey training?
Okay.
Things like mindfulness techniques, stress management tools,
Right.
even sports psychology consultations.
They can be mentally strong and resilient.
Exactly. It's like we've been treating the symptoms without really addressing the root causes.
Yeah.
We're focused on building physical strength and endurance, but what about mental toughness and emotional resilience?
That's a good point.
And there's more and more evidence to support this approach, We've seen how powerful mental training can be in other sports like golf and tennis, where you need a lot of focus and composure. It's time we start applying those same principles to hockey.
Yeah, absolutely. So to wrap things up, I think we've learned a lot today about this often hidden world of hockey injuries. It's not just about the big hits.
Right.
It's about the subtle strains, those repetitive stresses, and even the mental and emotional pressures that can really take a toll on these athletes.
And I think the biggest takeaway is that we don't have to just accept these injuries as part of the game. We have a better understanding now of the risks, the causes, and the potential solutions.
Yeah, the call to action for everyone involved, players, coaches, medical professionals, researchers, and fans, to really push for a safer and healthier future for the sport.
Imagine a future where hockey isn't just a thrilling sport to watch, but also a model for athlete well-being. Where science is really driving injury prevention, and athletes are empowered to perform at their best while minimizing those risks to their bodies and minds.
That's a future worth fighting for. So on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of hockey injuries. We hope you've learned something new, gained some new perspectives, and maybe even feel inspired to be part of the solution. Stay tuned for more deep dives coming soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Science of Hockey. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share it with your friends, teammates, or anyone who loves hockey as much as you do. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment to let us know what you liked, what you'd like to hear next, or any questions you have. Your feedback helps us make the show even better. Until next time, keep your skates sharp, your mind open, and keep chasing the science behind the game.